We now come to Clause 11, with which it will be convenient to debate Government Amendment 1, Clause 12, stand apart, Government Amendment 2 and Clause 14, stand apart. The question is that Clause 11 stand apart of the bill. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As part of this Group 1, I now beg to move Government Amendment 1. This lets the Secretary of State make regulations which determine the date or dates when the clauses 1 to 8 and schedules 1 to 3 of the bill come into force. The other provisions of the bill in clauses 9 to 14 come into force the day on which the bill is passed. This amendment seeks to overturn the amendment passed in the other place that will place a 12-month delay between the creation of Skills England and commencement of key parts of the bill, including the clauses which transfer functions from IFATE to be exercised by Skills England. It was hugely disappointing that despite broad support for the urgent need for reform, peers in the other place voted for this delay. Reform is exactly what this bill and Skills England will deliver. After 14 long years of complacency and neglect, this government is driving high standards. This government has a plan for change. A delay will benefit no one. Skills England is already operating in shadow form, and once the bill is passed, it stands ready to become a fully operational arm's-length body. The leadership is already in place. The Chair, the Vice Chair, the CEO and the Deputy CEO, and a full team of senior civil servants already working as one. The work is well underway. Skills England reported on skill gaps in September last year. It is connecting decision-making across regional and national government, as well as working closely with training providers, trade unions and employers. It is collaborating with businesses to develop sector plans for forthcoming industrial strategy. It is working closely with the Migration Advisory Committee to access skills needs, to identify shortages in occupations. This will help to identify and grow our domestic skills pipeline over time. This will reduce our reliance on overseas workers. We need to build our own skilled workforce, and Skills England is moving ahead. The bill gives it some of its key tools. There is no case for delay, and I therefore beg to move Government Amendment 1. I now turn to Government Amendment 2, which would remove Section 14, subsection 2 of the bill. It is normal procedure for bills originating in the House of Lords to require the insertion of standard privileged amendment at Section 14, subsection 2. This formally recognises the privilege of this House to control charges on people and public funds. Therefore, in accordance with normal procedure, we now remove the privilege amendment so that any such charge is imposed by this House rather than the House of Lords. I beg to move Government Amendment 2. Clause 11 sets out the territorial extent of the provisions contained within this bill. This is a standard clause for all legislation. Clauses 1 to 7 and 9 and Schedule 2 extend to England and Wales. Clause 8 extends to England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Clause 10 to 14 and Schedules 1 and 3 extend to England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. I've already touched upon Clause 12 as part of Government Amendment 1, which states when the provisions of the bill will come into effect. Clause 12 should stand part of the bill as amended by Government Amendment 1. Furthermore, as to standard practice, Clause 14 gives the bill a short title by which it may be known once it becomes an act. The short title given is the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, Transfer of Functions, etc. Act 2025. I commend clauses 11, 12 and 14 to the commitment and ask that they stand as part of the bill.
Shadow Minister.
Madam Chairman, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Clause 11 talks about the geographical extent of this bill, which it says is England and Wales. And this is a very small point, but it's worth noting that the bill and the decisions under it will actually affect other parts of the UK as well, not least because they affect degree apprenticeships and higher education. For example, the University of Strathclyde is a leading provider of graduate apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships across Scotland and England, and I'll return to that overlap later on. But on a more substantive note, Government Amendment 1 is seeking to overturn the one-year pause inserted in the other place. Why did peers insert this? Why was there so much debate such wariness about this? First, because there were good reasons that standard setting was put at arm's length and closer to employers. We heard from all sides of the House and the other place that this is a centralisation, and alongside other changes the government are making, it will risk directly damaging the status of these qualifications. Second, the government is doing several things which will make it less likely that businesses will take on apprenticeships, starting with the budget. But rather than fixing these problems, the government is reorganising. Skills England will be the 13th skills body in 50 years. It is abolishing IFATE, which was only created 7 years ago, yet more reorganisation rather than a focus on the real issues. Third, because peers had, and we have, real concerns that this reorganisation of the machinery of government will lead to harmful delays in addressing some of the most important strategic issues that we face. These concerns are borne out by the government's own impact assessment. The government's own impact assessment states that there may be a drop in apprenticeship starts while IFATE's functions are transferred to the Secretary of State. It says, and I quote, "The transfer of function from IFATE to the DfE could potentially cause a temporary slowdown in the growth rate of new apprenticeships and technical education courses due to potential delays in the approval process resulting from the bill." It also says, "This may disproportionately impact disadvantaged learners who rely more heavily on these pathways for advancement." And fourth, peers inserted this because of concerns about what will happen as DfE tries to absorb all the staff of IFATE. Lord Blunkett was probably one of the most interesting speakers in the Lords, and he said, "My fear is that given the number of people currently transferable from IFATE, which nudges 200, there is a real danger that IFATE will swamp Skills England at birth." When, 2 years ago, I led on the Learning and Skills document that was a precursor to Skills England, we never envisaged that an agency inside government would have to take on the assurance and accreditation of the relevant sector standards. And Lord Blunkett noted that a Skills England that has no legislative backing and no parliamentary references, but is down merely to the changing faces of ministerial and departmental appointments, is in danger of losing its birthright before it's even got off the ground. Now, this argument is somewhat different to the others. His argument, as somebody sympathetic to the creation of a body like Skills England, albeit outside the department, is that it needs time to establish its own culture, its own balance, and to grow and develop some roots before the IFATE elephant steps into the Skills England rowing boat. Now, since we last met as a committee, we've received further written evidence from the Skills Federation, which brings together 18 employer-led sector skills bodies representing over 150,000 employers. And they add their voice to these concerns. They warn, and I quote, "Transfer of IFATE functions risks disruption and a focus on operational rather than strategic priorities." And they say, "The movement of functions and the people that carry them out will always be challenging. It's important that the transfer is planned effectively and time taken to think through the implications for IFATE staff, but also the impact on the system. Compromises will no doubt have to be made to balance the need for pace with the requirement to maintain operational continuity. However, there is a key risk that the transfer of functions from IFATE will become the key focus for the setup of Skills England, and less attention, potentially resources, placed on achieving the overarching aims." And that is a direct reinforcement of the argument that Lord Blunkett was making in the Lords. It's very sensible advice to take our time. But in contrast to employers' groups, ministers say there is no time to wait. In truth, there is no great obstacle to the department doing all the things it might want to do and establishing Skills England a little bit more before that big transfer of staff. But ministers want to get this one-year pause out of the bill with their new Clause 1. It would be wiser, I think, to listen to the grey-haired people in their own party like Lord Blunkett, but it seems they are not minded to do that. Now, also in this grouping is the Government Amendment 2 to remove the Lord's Privilege Amendment. For the benefit of people following these proceedings, as the Minister said, the Lords automatically insert these things when there is legislation that starts in the Lords which involves levies and taxpayers' money to involve formal infringement of the Commons' privileges over these things. So there's nothing unusual about it. But these things are put in as a deliberate reminder that the bill we are debating does have a significant impact on the spending of both levy and taxpayers' money. And the sums involved here are non-trivial. Billions of pounds of spending are governed by IFATE today and by the DfE in future. So the ongoing chronic uncertainty about the government's plans to allow employers to take money out of apprenticeships are not just damaging for business, but damaging on a significant scale. During the last Bill Committee session, the Minister promised to write to me to set out what the government's position is on the 50% flexibility. And I wonder if she can tell me today when that letter is likely to appear. because businesses are starting to raise the alarm ever louder. Even since this committee last met, more businesses have come out to criticise. Jane Grattan, the Deputy Director of Public Policy at the British Chambers of Commerce, has said the lack of clarity about the future of the Growth and Skills Levy was creating, and I quote, fresh uncertainty among businesses. She said that some employers had told the BCC that they had put training plans on hold until they heard what alternatives would be funded in future. And she called on the government to lay out a clear timeline for reform, although, she said, threats to cut the levy before it had even been established are, and I quote, worrying and destabilising. Likewise, Simon Ashworth, the Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Policy at the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, said, there's little room for manoeuvre. Scrapping level 7 apprenticeships won't yield savings for years. Until the programme budget more closely matches the levy take, it's imperative that funding priorities are aimed at maintaining the sustainability of apprenticeship standards rather than introducing further non-apprenticeship flexibilities. A very important warning. And this is all happening against a backdrop where other types of technical education covered by IFATE are shrinking too. I am old enough to remember when Labour MPs spent years saying that adult skills spending was not generous enough. And yet yesterday we learned the DfE had to cut adult skills budgets by 6%. And this came out amazingly at the same time as, and it was overshadowed by, the Welfare Reform Green Paper, which mentioned training 18 times. In the Chamber the other day, the Secretary of State for the DWP made an argument, a good argument, that it's better to get people into training rather than park them on benefits, and yet elsewhere at the very same moment DfE ministers were cutting the training budget. Madam Deputy Chairman, Skills England was supposed to bring a joined-up approach to policy making, so there's not much sign of that here. He said it will reinforce the concerns of those who want technical education to be more independent and employer-led. And I'd like to ask the Minister a specific question relating to the funding that IFATE will be regulating. Yesterday we got an announcement on schools funding, and ASCL and the Confederation of Schools Trusts are warning that it only covers part of the costs of the national insurance increase, and it's leaving schools with a funding gap ranging from 10 to 35%. But at least for schools, they are getting the funding announcement before the start of the financial year, albeit only days before. Technical education is not so lucky. Colleges and 16 to 19 institutions will have to wait. They will be told of their allocations this May and then paid in September, even though they will actually have to start making the increased tax payments from the start of the new financial year in just a few days' time. And as James Kewen, Deputy Chief Executive of the Sixth Form Colleges Association, points out, 16 to 19 funding is uncertain at the best of times, but this year colleges are also waiting for their post-16 budget grant allocations scheduled for May and a decision on the 10% T-level uplift. This is all very late in the day. He is right. Once again, technical education is getting treated as the poor relation. Independent training providers and specialist colleges, we already know, won't get any compensation. And it's unclear how much of next month's national insurance rise will be covered by this grant. So my question to the Minister is, can she stand up and reassure the sector today that all of the additional costs, including those for indirectly employed staff, will be covered by this grant? Or will they, like schools, find that they have been short-changed? Madam Deputy Chairman, I won't labour the point, but many people, including employer groups and very experienced people on the Labour side, have warned about the rush to bring these powers and functions into the department and the effect that it will have on the government's own plans for Skills England. Ministers would be sensible to listen.
Damien Hines.
Thank you very much, Ms Moses. It's very good to see you in the chair for these proceedings today. I rise to speak against Government 1 and by extension in defence of Clause 12 as currently drafted in the bill as it came out of the other place. We need to be clear, I suppose, that we want Skills England to succeed. And Clause 12, as currently drafted, will help Skills England to succeed. It's a breathing space clause, allowing for a year of operation of Skills England before it has to absorb IFATE's functions. Now, the Minister just described it as disappointing that this clause is inserted by the other place. I don't think it's disappointing at all, Ms Furness. I think it's a very good thing. It's not anti-Skills England. It is a pro-Skills England clause to give it, the new body, its best chance of success. Now, my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, and I did not confer in preparing our notes for this morning, but I, like him, was very struck by another former Sheffield MP, the noble Lord Blunkett, and what he said in the other place. He noted that with the transfer of functions from IFATE, close to 200 people would transfer from IFATE over to Skills England, and in his words, there is a real danger that IFATE will swamp Skills England at birth. Now, Skills England has a really, really important function to perform, and were it to be hampered in that because of operational complexities and difficulties, that would be deeply regrettable. And I think to understand why this is significant, it's important to note that Skills England and IFATE have, if you like, different shapes. Think about, in analogy, think about different depths and breadths. So Skills England, we know, will prioritise, initially at least, will prioritise 10 sectors. They are the 8 sectors identified as growth-driving sectors in the industrial strategy. And then added to those, we have construction and health and care, which are also essential to some of the government's other missions. So the 8 plus 2 makes 10. And it will develop skills needs assessments for each of those 10 priority sectors to feed into the industrial strategy planning process. Now, in the Noble Baroness Smith's very helpful letter to peers of the 18th of this month, what's that? Is that yesterday or the day before? 2 days ago. She says that work is underway on the 8 growth-driving sectors identified in the industrial strategy, which does beg the question, well, what about the other 2, which are also identified as being crucial to government missions? But also another question, which is, what about the other volume sectors of employment in the economy? I used to work in hospitality for almost 20 years before coming to this place. Hospitality is an absolutely fundamental part of our economy. Hospitality and retail, along with care, form the biggest employers in our country. And I think perhaps sometimes there's a danger with being mission-led, that if you fall slightly outside the scope of the mission, do you perhaps get slightly overlooked? And I know that many people in those sectors would be very keen to hear more. If you then add to those 3 big volume sectors, so hospitality, retail and care, if you also add admin and support, 4 sectors, which collectively have historically accounted for about a quarter of GVA, gross value added, in this country, but account for about 3/4 of the people in the country who are in low pay. So for lots of social justice reasons, equality reasons, these sectors need to have proper focus. Now, so that's what Skills England is currently planning to do. IFATE, of course, does something rather different. It's on a different scale, but this is what I was saying about the difference between depth and breadth. So IFATE creates and maintains over 600 occupational standards for apprenticeships, for T-levels and higher technical qualifications. In a little more detail, it works with employers to develop, approve and review occupational standards, creates and maintains the occupational maps, which group together occupations into 15 routes. It approves, reviews and ensures the quality of approved technical qualifications and their alignment with the occupational standards, and it develops, reviews and approves apprenticeship standards. Now, Skills England is initially looking at a narrower set of sectors, but with a much broader remit for those sectors, and that's what I mean about the difference between breadth and depth. It does more than IFATE, and each of these additional things, each in their own right, is going to take a lot of work to properly establish. And that's why I say that this clause that's currently drafted is a pro-Skills England clause, because it seeks to give the best opportunity to achieve those ends. So these things big things, each of them are big things, these big 3 things for Skills England are, first of all, to identify where skills gaps exists, Secondly, to work with the Industrial Strategy Council and the Migration Advisory Committee to address this. I say those two bodies, those are the two that have typically been mentioned in government documentation, although in recent times, I think ministers have also started mentioning, very importantly, and should not be overlooked, the Labour Market Advisory Board, which the noble Baroness Smith was talking about in the House of Lords recently. And then thirdly, they are to identify the training that is accessible via the Growth and Skills Levy. Now, as I say, each of those individually is a very large undertaking which will take time to establish. So if we take them in turn, at first, Skills England will identify where skills gaps exist. And on the face of it, that might sound like a straightforward thing to do. It is not. The first question is, what constitutes a skills gap? And to what level of detail are we talking? Are these individual job roles? Are they groups of job roles? Are they industries? And it's necessary to distinguish between skills that need to be provided systemically in our education and training system, as opposed to things that firms themselves should be able to train for. Now, it's important to note that not being able to fill vacancies, and we all know that it can be difficult filling vacancies in my own constituency, where we've historically, in the last 10 years or so, had very low levels of unemployment. It's the number one thing that businesses talk about. And it is obviously related to skills gaps, but it's not necessarily the same thing as skills being absent. So one key question, and it's very relevant for some of those sectors that I mentioned, is for those firms, and the ministers talked about, we need to home grow our labour and so on, but for those firms who are importing labour, can they be persuaded to make the investments, to take on, in some cases, take on the risks that would be involved in not bringing in labour from abroad? And that's a question for individual firms. It's also a question, actually, for some whole sectors or subsectors. To give a real example, in social care, I think most people would say that it is possible, it's perfectly possible to train people up to work in social care, but we still have a lack of people who, for whatever reason, we haven't got time here today, I don't intend to go into it, but for potentially a complex set of reasons, people do not want to go into social care. And when there is a lack of skills, and bear in mind that, when you talk to business leaders, and when they complain about lack of skills, actually, typically they don't talk about the sorts of things that can be certificated. And they don't say, we've got a lack of, not enough people have grade 2 above GCSE maths. Or they don't say not enough people have a BTEC in such and such, or an apprenticeship in something else. They talk actually mostly about soft skills, or what are called soft skills. Some soft skills really are soft skills. Some of them are more probably what in business terms you would call behaviours, about self-discipline and turning up to work on time and so on. And it's not clear to me how that, which as I say is the number one thing that in my experience businesses do talk about, the set of soft skills, how that relates to the work of Skills England. But if we do come back to specific questions about the skills required for particular sectors or individual job roles, there's also the question of how far into the future is Skills England looking? Are they talking about how we fill skills gaps that we have today? Or are we talking about what's the effect going to be of AI on the labour market, and what should we be planning for 10 or 15 years hence? And there's also the question about the level of ambition. So there is a certain set of skills required, craft skills and so on, required to fill the vacancies of today as jobs exist today. But it's also true that we have in this country, and by the way, this has been true every year since I've been alive. I think I said this last Thursday as well. I'm 55 today, so that's quite a long time. Not today, it's not actually my birthday, but I am still 55. We have a productivity gap. against the United States, Germany, France, and others. So if you've been really ambitious, you wouldn't say, well, what are the skills that we need to fill the jobs that we have today? You would say, well, what is it that we need to do to make up that skills gap, and then what are the skills needed to fulfill that? Now, in identifying where skills gaps exist, Skills England was also going to have to deal with localities, because, of course, jobs exist in certain places. And they will have to work with devolved administrations and with mayors. And mayors may have their own views about what they think are the skills gaps, in fact they will have, what they think are the skills gaps in their areas. And so will there be a sort of hierarchy of analysis? At what level is Skills England going to identify the gaps, and to what extent will that fall to the local area? And I'll come back to that a little later on. It's also true, and I've experienced this myself in talking about the adult education budget, for example, with mayors and local authorities, that quite rightly, quite understandably, local governance structures and leaders quite often want more power to be devolved to their local area. And Skills England is going to have to find its place in what can be a tension. Then there's the question of LSIPs, local skills improvement plans, and local skills improvement partnerships. And in the other place in debate on this, the Noble Lord Lucas said, the word I hear is that LSIPs have been a real success, as they are effective and flexible. It takes a couple of years for the DFE to evolve a qualification, but LSIPs can do it in weeks, because they are so focused on the actual local employer and need and work closely with a provider. The Liberal Democrat, Noble Baroness Garden, said, I think it's important that the Secretary of State must set the priorities for LSIPs and review them regularly to ensure that their priorities are reflected in national strategies, for the creation of standards. And the Minister herself, the noble lady, said this, though, that LSIPs and the employer representative bodies that develop them will also provide important intelligence to Skills England to perform its assessment of national and regional skills, both now and in future. They will work with Skills England to resolve skills gaps. But in her letter, the letter to peers of 2 days ago, she writes that Skills England is now already responsible for oversight of LSIPs and relationship management for all 38 of the designated employer representative bodies, but also that LSIPs will be a joint responsibility between mayoral authorities and those employer representative bodies. Now, devolution is increasing, so another part of the background here is that we have the devolution white paper, and although at the same time as we're creating Skills England to be this sort of uber skills authority in the land, the foreword to the English devolution white paper, in the hand of none other than the Deputy Prime Minister herself, says we will give mayors strong new powers over housing planning, skills, employment support and more. It says the majority of the Adult Skills Fund is devolved already, but we need to go further. And it says strategic authorities will take on joint ownership of the local skills improvement plan model alongside employer representative bodies, which will set out the strategic direction for skills provision in an area. So the question for Skills England is, how will that work in practice? And clearly it is going to take a lot of time and work to make these new structures work at a time, of course, when the structures themselves, in so many areas with the devolution white paper being implemented, when those structures themselves are changing. And there is still a thing, possibly, this is a complicated architecture, but there is still potentially a thing missing, which is ultimately how you match up demand and supply. Because it's relatively straightforward to say, well, we've got a skills gap in this sector, in this industry, in this particular job role, so we'll create a a qualification or accelerate a qualification or revise a qualification to fulfil that need. That doesn't make a single young person or older person decide, yes, that's what I'm going to study, that's how I'm going to train to go into that line of work. Now, LSIPs sort of do that. At a local level, they liaise between colleges and employers to try to make sure that what's on offer is relevant for the local economy, for the vacancies, the job needs that people going through that college are going to face when they leave. But it does do it in a fairly soft way. There's no very hard lever that says there will only be X number of positions available in, for example, hairdressing or care or whatever it might be, because there will only be that number of jobs. There are some other countries where they take a much harder approach. I remember when I was at the DFE, we visited the Netherlands. Well, it's the same trip that we visited Germany, but the Netherlands was more to talk about college-based technical and vocational education and training, where they have a legislative framework which effectively requires, as they explained it, there only to be the number of training places or studying places in a college in proportion to that which is needed in the economy. Now, there are some difficult questions that get attached to that, because at the end of the day, yes, of course we want numbers of people studying X to link to the jobs that are available, but also somebody between the age of 16 and 18, we do want them doing something. And it may be that there is a mismatch in those numbers and you need a different or moderated approach. So the question for the Minister, and it's a question for Skills England, and a difficult question for them to address in this 12 months envisaged in Clause 12, would assist them to do this, is will Skills England ultimately be setting bounds around the numbers of people training, including in 16 to 18 colleges, training in different skills areas. The second thing that Skills England is to do is to work with the Industrial Strategy Council and the Migration Advisory Committee to address these matters. Now, working across government is a non-trivial task. And in government, there are many different parts of it, many departments who have an interest, have a role in the labour market. And there are different accountabilities that attach to different departments. So the Treasury has a great interest, for obvious reasons, in the employment percentage. So does DWP. The Minister's own department, the DFE, is held accountable for the number of people doing apprenticeships. The Government Equalities Office looks at the gender pay gap. Multiple departments seek to reduce the ethnic minority employment gap and the disability employment gap. The Home Office has control ultimately over immigration and visas. And then the different departments have responsibility for different sectors. So, for example, DCMS has particular responsibility for tourism, which is a big employer, as well as the creative industries, which are a big engine of growth. DHSC, Department of Health and Social Care, clearly has responsibility for health and social care. And DEFRA has responsibility for agriculture with its particular labour, including seasonal labour needs. And then overall, of course, all departments, but particularly the Treasury and indeed number 10, have accountability and responsibility for living standards. But the levers are not necessarily in the same departments as the ultimate responsibility. So colleges and training provision comes under the DFE, although of course, as this Minister will know, it's not a direct control relationship. The out-of-work regime is controlled by the DWP. Corporate practice and regulation comes under the business department. Developing or helping people to develop their careers when already in work is a shared responsibility. Historically came more under the Treasury because of tax credits. Then as universal credits developed, that has shifted to DWP. Mental and physical health, of course, comes under the Health Department. Childcare comes under 3 different departments for the 3 major programmes. The DFE has the main 3 hours programme, but the Treasury has had tax-free childcare, and DWP has the reimbursement under universal credit for childcare. And then, of course, there's the whole area of local government, which in central government comes under MHCLG, but in reality, again, that's not a direct controlling relationship.
May I remind the Minister that you've slightly off scope there, and I'd be very grateful if you could just stick to the different clauses that we are debating today.
I'm very grateful, Chair, for your guidance, and of course I will ensure I do. In my defence, I'm trying to illustrate, and I'm sorry, I'm not arguing your judgment, of course, but what I'm trying to illustrate is the large number of things that this new body will have to figure out. And as the Noble Lord Lord Blunkett said, if at the same time they're taking on this enormous existing role of the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, 200 people coming on board, that makes it harder to figure all these things out, which I think we all wish the new body and its leadership the very best with. But of course, I take your judgment.
I'm sure the honourable member wishes to hear the Minister fairly soon in response to your comments.
Of course I do. Of course I do, Ms. Furness. The different parts of government that this new body will deal with include the Migration Advisory Committee, which is, of course, a well-established part of the machinery of government that takes its commissions from the Home Secretary. And this is a quote from gov.uk. The MAC, the Migration Advisory Committee, bases all recommendations on what it sees as being in the interests of the resident population, taking into account that migration has different effects on different groups. There will be conflicts between that aim and the aims of Skills England, and who will resolve those conflicts. It will also work with the Industrial Strategy Advisory Council, which is an expert committee reporting to the Business Secretary and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, made up of experts, as it suggests. Now, interestingly, and we'll come on to this perhaps in the next set of, in some of the new clauses, the government will legislate to establish this body in statute when parliamentary time allows, which raises the question of why for this one, and not Skills England, and suggests that there is perhaps a hierarchy of these bodies. Then there's also the Labour Market Advisory Body, and the LMAB. It reports into the DWP Secretary of State to support DWP, and I quote, to better understand the current state of the labour market, to help design policies and strategies to address key challenges. And I won't go through all the things that they're supposed to do, but again, suffice to say, if you have the whip encourages me, Madam Chair, but I would not risk your wrath, despite her best intent or her best efforts. But suffice to say, there is again a cut across, because of course, in terms of getting people back into work, as DWP is focused on, of course there is some tension. So will Skills England be able to ask, for example, for changes in the conditionality regime operated by DWP and the Job Centre network to improve skill matching? And will there be better join-up between DWP work coaches and the National Careers Service? And then finally, Ms Furness, the third thing that it is to be responsible for is potentially the biggest, the most controversial of all. And that is, well, in the rubric that the government have put forward, they said to identify the training that is accessible via the Growth and Skills Act. I don't think they do actually mean identify. I think they mean specify what is available to be paid for through the Growth and Skills levy. I won't go through all the arguments about the levy, but they will have to. This new body will have to. And this 12 months that Clause 12 envisages would be a good time to do that. But they will have to think about what the real purpose of the levy is and the distinction between firm-specific skills and training, sector-specific skills and training, and generic transferable skills and training. The levy purpose was to increase the total amount of investment in human capital going on in this country in order to help our productivity gap and fill job vacancies, and it will need to make sure that it carries on with that purpose. So I'll conclude at that point, Ms Furness, by just saying, I hope I've given us flavour, and there is more. There is more. I hope I have given a flavour of the enormous strategic challenges, an enormous job of work for these very, very good people. By the way, I think the appointments, there are some very encouraging signs in the appointments that the Secretary of State has made. But what they have to take on is enormous, and we want them to succeed. We need them to succeed in this endeavour, and it would be far better to stage the approach so that, first of all, Skills England is established, takes on these great strategic roles, working across government and throughout the economy, and then 12 months later, subsumes IFIT.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. The Right Honourable Member speaks of the enormous challenges. Might I point out the enormous challenges that was left by the previous government, by which he was part of. Now, in responding to the Right Honourable Gentleman and the Honourable Member, who were both previously in government, it is only right that I set the context of the failings of the previous government before I move to attempt to respond to the many, many points and views and opinions and ideas that were absolutely made. And actually, to put into context, the previous government did have 14 years to deal with the skills problems and crises that we're facing today. UK employers reported that over a third of UK vacancies in 2022 were due to skills shortages. Does the previous government like to respond? That's over a third of UK. I didn't expect the opposite to respond anyway. Look, across the UK, almost 1 in 10 of over 2.5 million roles are in critical demand. More than 9. I'm going to make some progress first, then I'll give way. More than 90% of these are in roles requiring periods of work-related training or education. My point that I'm making is the last government did not solve the skills shortages. The last government held back growth and opportunity. This government is moving forward. We want to boost the skills by Skills England.
We should give way.
The last government prolonged uncertainty and businesses. I'll give way.
Thank you. The Minister encouraged us to intervene at this point. One of the things that the last opposition used to complain about a lot was what's happened to the adult skills budget. Can the Minister confirm that the government has just announced a 6% cut in the adult skills budget? And can the Minister explain how that fits together with the government's constant rhetoric in the welfare cuts debate just the other day about getting people out of unemployment and into training? How will this 6% cut help move people from welfare into training?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I fear that we are straying far, far away from the purpose
Could you answer the question?
of this bill and what needs to be achieved.
You invited the question.
So I will respond, and I will continue to respond. Skills will power this mission-driven government. This government has a plan for change. The need to boost Britain's skill is crucial to our mission-driven government. We need skills to drive growth. We need skills to build homes. We need skills to deliver energy security, and we need skills to build on an NHS fit for the future. We want to move forward, and we want to make sure that there is how. But we want to.
Please don't have a conversation.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. I mean, Madam Chair. It's all very flustering at times. There's been 14 years, as I've already said, of complacency and neglect from the previous government, and we know that following the reforms introduced by the previous government, including the introduction of the apprenticeship levy, the apprenticeship starts have fallen by over 30%. It is concerning that fewer young people are benefiting from apprentices. with apprenticeship starts by those aged under 25 down by almost 40%, which is why Skills England has been operating in shadow form and preparing for its full establishment since it was announced by the Prime Minister in July 2024. In referring to Skills England, the teams responsible for Skills England's broader strategic functions are already operational and establishing links with their counterparts in IFATE. By combining the analytical and regional functions that has already started to deliver while in shadow form. Skills England is functioning in shadow form and is already delivering. Detailed transitional planning has taken place to ensure that functions moving into Skills England from IFATE will transition smoothly with no break in service. The planned continuity in staffing and team structures will ensure that occupational standards, apprenticeships and wider technical qualifications will continue to be approved and T-level contracts will continue to be delivered, supported and indeed monitored. This approach will also ensure that Skills England maintains the vital links with employers and other partners that IFATE teams have previously established. Now, my honourable friend in the noble place, the Minister for Skills, recently met with many peers and went through many of the processes and functions for the Institute of Apprenticeship Technical Education and transfer of functions to the bill, and has outlined this, and a member of that letter is also available for this committee. This government is focused on establishing a coherent skills system with more flexible training options that support employers to fill skills gaps while driving growth and spreading opportunity. Businesses are backing this government's mission to grow the economy by breaking down barriers to opportunities for young people through our planned reforms. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady. Speaking of gaps, I just wondered if she was going to address my one specific question from my remarks. Can she stand up and reassure the sector today that all of the additional costs, including those for additional staff, indirectly employed staff, will be covered by the forthcoming NICS grant?
I would just impress upon the honourable member to just allow me to proceed further, because
I'll wait for the answer.
Because there is so much to say. We've announced 300 million additional revenue for further education, with 50 million being available to sixth form colleges and FE colleges from April to help respond to priorities including workforce, recruitment and retention. And we're offering up to 6k annually through the targeted retention initiatives to attract and retain new teachers in critical subjects. We continue to support recruitment and retention with teachers training bursaries worth up to 31,000 tax-free in certain key subject areas, and provide support for industry professionals to enter the FE teaching workforce through our Take Teaching Further programme. Now, with regards to House Schools England and its relationships with devolved governments in the UK, the territorial scope of Skills England is England only. Devolved authorities will be essential partners for Skills England to ensure that our skills systems are aligned and meeting skills needs of the whole UK labour market. It will be vital for us to work openly and collaboratively together. The Department for Education and Shadow Skills England have undertaken engagement with the devolved governments and the territorial offices with regular meetings going forward. Now, going forward in devolved areas, strategic authorities will play a stronger role in LSIPs, working with a designated ERB, and we are currently in process of reviewing the geographies of LSIPs to ensure they align, where possible, with the boundaries of devolved areas.
Thank you. I'm grateful to give you. She may be about to come on to this. So what will the relationship be between LSIPs and whatever strategies they may draw up and Skills England?
So, as I've already said, going forward, obviously, within the devolved areas, the ERBs working with LSIPs and ERBs maintain that close and strong relationship with Skills England. And I'll proceed a bit further on this issue. else it's provide ongoing mechanisms through which local employers, strategic authorities, providers and other stakeholders come together to identify and address skills needs and issues. This supports Skills England's aim to have a skilled workforce the economy needs at a national, regional and indeed local level. Now, in response to the question on the impact of national insurance and costs on skills and education, the government has agreed that public sector employers will receive support in recognition of the increase in their national insurance contributions from April 2025. We are also providing 155 million for post-16 schools and academies and further educational colleges. This is an increase of over 1 billion in the financial year of 2025 to 26 for the education sector.
On that point, we should give way. Can I just ask if the Minister could promise two things? First, that she will publish the methodology about how the figure of 155 million was like that, or she published the methodology. And the second question, can she reassure the sector that that sum is enough to cover all of the costs of the national insurance increase that they will experience, including the costs for their indirectly employed staff as well?
I hear what the Honourable Member is saying, and I will endeavour to get more information to him on those points. So, with regards to the Minister asking a question about the flexibility of apprenticeships and levies, I have written to the chairs of this committee yesterday addressing the member's question, but I do understand this was yesterday. So, Madam Chair,
Please, show some respect.
Government Amendment 1 is crucial in ensuring that Skills England is not necessarily held back. Transformation is underway. Businesses and employers can't afford to wait. Government Amendment 2 is a normal procedure for bills originating in the House of Lords. I therefore urge the committee to support the amendments in clauses 11, 12 and 14.
Yeah. Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Chairman. I mean no disrespect, but the Minister promised in the last of these sessions that she would write to me. That letter has not arrived yet. She may say that it's been sent, but it is telling that the things that we are debating will certainly be writing into law.
My point was
still
that you were actually
receiving the.
You were talking while you were sitting, and you should, you sat down and you should have pressed again.
I take your point, Madam Deputy Chairman. Look, we are keen to move to a vote on Gov 1. We think it's a big mistake. We've already explained why, and I won't recapitulate that.
Right, the question is that Clause 11 stand part of the bill.
Aye.
As many of you of that opinion, aye.
Aye.
And Gov 1, no.
Right. On the contrary, no.
No. Is this Gov 1?
Forgive me, Chair.
No, we're on 11. Sorry.
Are we voting on Government 1?
No, we're on 11.
Clause 11 stand part of the bill. That's what we voted.
We'll just do that. Let it go start again.
The question is that Clause 11 stand part of the bill. As many as are or of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Right, we now come to Government Amendment 1, proposed to Clause 12, which has just been debated. Minister to move formally.
Formally.
Government Amendment 1, proposed to Clause 12, is on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as or of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary,
No.
I think the ayes have it. No, is that a division or an amendment? Oh, right. Sorry about that. Division. Division 12. Are the whips happy to proceed?
Pam Cox.
Aye.
Janet Davey.
Aye.
Josh Dean. Aye. Lauren Edwards. Aye. Vicky Foxcroft.
Aye.
Anna Geldard.
Aye.
Damien Hines.
No.
Lee Ingham.
Aye.
Neil O'Brien.
No.
Melanie On.
Aye.
Rebecca Paul.
No.
Ian Sollum,
No.
Alan Strickland,
Aye.
Peter Swallow,
Aye.
Lawrence Turner.
The ayes were 11, the noes were 4, so the ayes have it, unlock. We now come to the question that Clause 12, as amended, stand part of the bill which has just been debated. The question is that Clause 12, as amended, stand part of the bill, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Clause 13. The question is that Clause 13 stand part of the bill.
Is this in this grouping?
Is this in the,
I think it's in 14.
This is next.
Yeah, we're moving on to the next group.
We make the decisions on the other ones.
Have we done 14?
No, we haven't got 14
We haven't
yet.
got to 14 yet.
It's group. I see that group.
Yeah, you have to vote on
Just call the minister.
the minister to begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As part of Group 2, I now rise to speak to Clause 13 of the bill. Clause 13 contains provisions to ensure continuity and consistency of functions that are transferred from IFATE to Secretary of State. This will allow functions already performed by IFATE to be treated as having been done by the Secretary of State. It includes a provision enabling the Secretary of State to continue things that are in process of being done or in relation to IFATE immediately before the function was transferred. These would also ensure smooth commencement of new legislation and transition from existing legislation. These functions may only become clear closer to when the functions are transferred. Therefore, Clause 13 includes a power to address this by way of regulations. Without this clause, there will be no statutory way of ensuring a smooth transition of the functions carried out by IFATE under the current legislation to the Secretary of State under the new legislation. I commend this clause to the committee and ask that it stand as part of the bill.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't want to say too much about this. This clause is just a reminder that we are trying to make major changes to the engine of our scale system while the engine is still running. And I've already quoted from the Government's own impact assessment pointing out that the impact of the transition will be to slow down apprenticeship approvals and numbers, so I won't recapitulate that. But I'll come back to the challenges that this changes to the engine while the engine is still running will cause later on in new clauses.
The question is that Clause 13 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Now moving on to Government Amendment 2, Clause 14. We now come to the Government Amendment 2 proposed to Clause 14, which was debated earlier. Minister to move formally.
Formally.
Government Amendment... Government Amendment 2 proposed Clause 14. As on the amendment paper, the question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the question that Clause 14, as amended, stand part of the bill, which was debated earlier. The question is that Clause 14, as amended, stand part of the bill. As many are of that opinion say aye. Aye. And the noes, the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to new Clause 1. I call Ian Sollom.
It's a pleasure to serve under you today. So I rise to move new Clause 1, which addresses fundamental concerns about the governance and accountability of Skills England. So while the bill as amended in the Lords does now make reference to Skills England, which the original bill presented to the Lords did not, it still does not establish it properly as an organisation, define its powers, or provide robust mechanisms for parliamentary scrutiny of its work. The bill, as we know, simply abolishes the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education and transfers its functions directly to the Secretary of State, with only limited reporting requirements. As already been mentioned earlier on in this committee, the most recent evidence provided to the committee reinforces those concerns, as has already been highlighted by the Shadow Minister, particularly those from the Skills Federation. Now, new Clause 1 remedies this by requiring comprehensive proposals for Skills England to be laid before Parliament for proper scrutiny and approval. It would ensure both houses have a meaningful say in how this organisation is structured and operates, and it would establish ongoing accountability through annual statements to Parliament and formal evaluation of its governance structure within the first year. The Government has positioned Skills England as transformative, and the Minister's letter to peers, that was also shared with this committee earlier this week, outlines hugely impressive ambitions for Skills England, and I welcome those, as I think we all would. But the governance framework that's described in that letter is largely discretionary. The framework document that the Minister references in that letter, which has still not formally been published ahead of this committee, will be finalised by agreement between the Department and Skills England, with no formal parliamentary input at all. So we're being asked to approve a fundamental restructuring of the skills system without proper guarantees about how the body will operate or be held accountable. The skills system is simply too critical to our future to proceed just on faith. And I think members opposite would be making the same arguments if they were in our position on this side. Now, I want to stress that this is not about preventing the creation of Skills England. It's about ensuring it is established with proper scrutiny and accountability that an organisation of such importance deserves. And if the Government truly believes in Skills England as the vehicle to address our skills challenges, it really should welcome the provisions for proper accountability in new Clause 1. So, thank you very much.
Draft proposals for establishing new executive agency.
The question is that new Clause 1 be read a second time. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. The question is that new Clause... No. Shadow Minister, sorry.
I'm very grateful, Madam Deputy Chairman. I only rise at this point to support the Honourable Member for St Neots and Mid Cambridgeshire. I'm going to speak to our amendments, new clauses 2 and new clause 3 in a moment, and it's easier to do it to our own clauses. But I don't want the Honourable Member for St Neots and Mid Cambridgeshire to feel that is because I do not support his new clause. I absolutely do. I think it's entirely sensible. I think if the Government had sense, they would listen to him and include it within the bill.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the Honourable Member for his new Clause 1 and for his amendment. New Clause 1 would require the Secretary of State to lay draft proposals for a new executive agency to be known as Skills England before Parliament within 6 months of the bill gaining royal assent. Complexity and fragmentation within the skills systems are contributing to critical skill gaps in our economy. We need to urgently reform the delivery of skills and technical education without delay. I cannot stress enough we need to do this without delay. After 14 years of inaction, we really need to get on with the job and build the foundations, and build back the foundations. We plan to establish Skills England as an executive agency requiring a robust and rigorous process. This process applies across government for all executive agencies. As with new executive agencies, the approval of the creation of Skills England will be announced to Parliament in a written ministerial statement in both houses. In line with other executive agencies, Skills England will be required to have robust governance arrangements and clear lines of accountability, including to Parliament. Ministers, the Principal Accountancy Officer and the Chief Executive will all be accountable to Parliament. They could also appear before the select committees, if invited. The broader governance and accountability in which Skills England will operate will be set out in the framework document. This is a core constitutional document for all armless bodies, which must be approved by the Treasury. The framework document will detail how Skills England will regularly report on its functions and performance. This will include publishing a corporate plan and annual report. There is a high level of interest in Skills England's stakeholders, such as the Association of Colleges, who have expressed strong support for plans to establish Skills England. They recognise the critical role it will play in the government's broader post-16 education and skills agenda. We have listened to and acted on the contributions made by peers in the other place, and this is why the government has provided even greater transparency about what Skills England will do. The bill already requires the Secretary of State to report within 6 months of IFA closure. The report will detail which functions are being exercised by Skills England and the impact on apprenticeships and technical education in England. The amendment is therefore not necessary, and we need to address urgent skill challenges in our economy. There is already a robust approach to establishing and running an executive agency, and the government has included a legislative commitment to a report on Skills England's functions. On this basis, I ask the Honourable Member reconsider. Thank you.
Ian Solomon.
I thank the Minister for her response. In the interests of time and lunch, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I would like to push this to a vote.
Question. New clause 1 proposed as on the amendment paper. The question is that the clause be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
No.
Division.
Division 12.
Yeah, not the doors.
Pam Cox.
No.
Janet Davey.
No.
Josh Dean.
No.
Lauren Edwards.
No.
Vicky Foxcroft.
No.
Anna Gelderd.
No.
Damien Hines.
Aye.
Lee Ingham.
No.
Neil O'Brien.
Aye.
Melanie On.
No.
Rebecca Paul.
Aye.
Ian Solomon.
Aye.
Alan Strickland.
No.
Peter Swallow.
No.
Lawrence Turner.
The ayes were 4 and the noes were 11. So the ayes have it. Sorry? Oh, sorry, the noes have it. Yeah, I prefer the ayes to the noes.
Thought we had that.
Yeah, the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked.
I beg to move that this committee do now adjourn.
Absolutely. The question is that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned, as many as are of that opinion. Say aye.
Aye.
Noes? None whatsoever. Yeah. Order, order. I beg to move the debate be now adjourned.
Committee